I think, like perhaps a lot of people who work in interpretation, I found it after doing a number of different jobs and working in a number of different fields. Many years ago I did a degree in English and related literature, and I think what I do now reflects an interest in language and in words and writing. That's a very strong part of what I do now, and I can see that it began with the degree in English. I also had periods when I worked as a guide at an historic house. I worked as a countryside ranger. I worked in tourist information. And I found that I really enjoyed working with people and helping them discover and think about the places that they visited. And so eventually, through a path that's probably too complex to go into in a short interview, I found myself working in interpretation, and I've been in that field now for 32 years. I think for me the starting point has to be that you find what is interesting for you in it. I think it's very difficult to write good text if you don't find the object interesting in some way. So that involves obviously some research and some thinking about it. I think it's then a matter of thinking, what are the ideas that this object represents? What ideas does it unlock? Because objects, I think, are sometimes keys to understanding ideas and the way people live and things they do. And then choosing one or two, perhaps three, but I'm always keen that you keep it simple, one or two ideas that you think will really interest your audience, your visitors, the people who are going to look at the object. I think it's also worth remembering that they have come to look at the object, or they've come to look at the place. They haven't really come to read your text, and that's a hard lesson to learn, but the text needs to work as something that adds to their visit and helps them appreciate the place more. You've got to start with, what is it that's going to interest them about the object? What ideas will interest them about this object? I think first of all it needs to be easy to read. People, when they're using interpretation, they're standing up usually. They've got a lot of other demands on their attention. As I said before, they haven't come to read the text, they've come to visit the place. So the text needs to be easy to read, what I would call accessible. And that means for me that it needs to use everyday language, the sort of language you'd use in conversation rather than academic language. You need to write in sentences that are shorter than you'd find in a lot of other written media. And the text itself needs to be quite short so that it's not going to take too long for them to read it. I think there are other qualities. Those are, if you like, mechanical or technical aspects of language. I think the other things that help to make the text engaging for people is that it tells them a story that is going to interest them. If possible, you refer to things that are perhaps common to their experience or to every human being's experience, and that helps people to engage with the ideas you're presenting. I think for me, I would say the essential thing is that it enriches your visit to a place, and by a place I could include a museum collection or an art gallery, a nature reserve, an historic site. I think it sends you away with a sense that you've made some connection with that place. You've found a meaning there that you find interesting. That can mean that you understand it, you understand its history in a way that an historian or a natural historian might, or a scientist might say they understand it. But I think the most important thing is that they feel it has some personal meaning for them. They've discovered a connection with it. I think really good interpretation, but this is perhaps rare, it depends on special circumstances and on particular visitors. It's possible for interpretation to send people away thinking in a very different way about the place, the subject, possibly even the world. And it can help them to look at other places or other things with new eyes. I can think of, two examples that I would give. One of them is, I might say, quite light-hearted. I remember visiting many years ago an art gallery in Paris that displayed Impressionist paintings. And I had been aware of Impressionist paintings, and I thought they were pretty, but I had never really learnt how to look at them. And this exhibition had a very good introduction, not in specialist language. It was a very gentle introduction to what Impressionist painters were trying to do, and I found myself looking at these paintings in a new way. And that stayed with me. I've felt that, okay, this genre of painting now means something to me. I've learnt how to look at it, if you like. And in a more serious note, there are several possibilities there, but I think I might select an exhibition I saw just a couple of years ago in Sweden, where they displayed objects from the Silk Road, the trade route that linked China with Europe. And they talked about the Silk Road as a great engine of economic prosperity. And they talked about how the Silk Road linked many different nationalities and cultures along its length, and how those cultures were affected by contact with each other. The Chinese culture itself was affected by the cultures with which they traded. And the exhibition really prompted you to think about what does that intercultural contact mean, and the fact that we might see it as threatening or be worried about it, but the way the exhibition was presenting it, it was encouraging you to think about the fact that it also enriches cultures and moves them forward, helps them to progress. I think I would fall back on a way of describing interpretation that I came up with a little while ago. I think that what you're aiming to do is to offer people an interesting idea, expressed briefly in clear, accessible language, and presented in a way that encourages people to make connections between what you are interpreting and the life, the reader's life, the visitor's life. And that, to me, is a summary of what interpretation is about. And I think it would be the piece of advice that I'd give somebody wanting to write their own bit of interpretation.